and welcome to Indianomics. One word that we constantly hear traders in financial markets say in India with some fear and trepidation is watch out for the Brexit vote. Now, what does this mean? This means that on June 23rd, citizens of the United Kingdom will vote to decide whether Britain stays in the European Union or it leaves the European Union. The fears in financial circles are about what will happen if Britain exits. Will the European Union itself get looser and collapse eventually? Will the euro tumble immediately? Well, we have three guests joining us all the way from London itself, the place where the action is. Jane FOLEY of RABOBANK International, Dahn of Ashmore Group, and Jeff Chowdhry, Senior Portfolio Manager at LGM Investments. But before I welcome the guests, here is a brief backgrounder of the issue. The European Community was formed in 1967 and Britain joined it in 1973. Britain held a referendum first in 1973 in which the British voted 66% to stay in the European Community as it was then known. In 1991, European nations signed the Maastricht Treaty and formed a union in 1993 which pledged to form a single currency in 1999. Britain decided not to join the euro but retain its membership in the union. Now, what is the European Union? It comprises a European Commission which is made up of 28 commissioners, one from each country. It is the civil service of the European Union and it spends the money contributed by the European Union countries. Then there is the European Parliament of 750 members that legislates on all proposals brought in by the European Commission. Membership in the European Union means UK and EU are together in a single market for goods, services, capital and workers. This means no customs duties on British exports to European Union and vice versa. Also, British companies will be subject to European Union's quality standards and competition laws. European Union membership also means free mobility of labour. Migrants from any European Union country must pay taxes in Britain and will be entitled to unemployment benefits, child allowances and other benefits in Britain. Britain contributes to the European Union's budget, but only the United Kingdom gets a rebate. About a third of the money has to be spent in Britain itself. In 2015, for instance, Britain paid £17.8 billion, but of this, £4.9 billion was spent by the European Union in Britain itself. Also, £4.4 billion got paid back to the UK government for farm subsidies and other programs. So, why are some British wanting to leave the Union and why have they called a referendum on the issue on the 23rd of June? Among the 3 or 4 main complaints are that Britain hasn't gained by remaining in the Union, Britain is paying too much for too little, the immigrants are becoming a drain on the system, the Eurozone may eventually dictate too much to Britain, etc. However, the concern for the world is what happens if and after Britain exits the European Union. Will more nations follow suit? Will the euro tumble and disintegrate finally? Will the pound tumble even more? In short, will there be chaos in global financial markets? Okay, that's the background. So now let me welcome Jane FOLEY of RABOBANK International, Jeff Chowdhry of LGM Investments and Dahn of Ashmore Investments. Gentlemen and lady, thank you very much for joining me. Jane, let me start with you. Well, the story is that Britain entered the European Union way back in 1971 and a referendum approved this in 1973. Why the sudden distaste for the European Union after what, so many years, almost 50 years?
Well, of course, if we go back to right at the start of the history of the European Union, in fact, if we go back to the late 1960s, the UK was not a founding member. In fact, back then there was a lot of scepticism about joining the system. It was only later on in the 1960s, as European growth seemed to be doing so well, that Britain really wanted to join. And at that point, it was initially vetoed by France and later joined. Now, there was, in the 1970s, another referendum. 2/3 of the UK people wanted to join. But I think it's fair to say that the mentality of the UK population is isolationist. There's always been some scepticism about Europe. That's perhaps one of the reasons why the UK did not join the euro, and we have, of course, still got the sterling currency. So there's always been some scepticism, a function of the fact that the UK is, of course, an island. So this isn't necessarily a sudden move. And I think what is also worth pointing out is that there is right now a lot of nationalistic tendencies in various European countries, and quite possibly the most lasting legacy of this vote in the UK, the referendum on June the 23rd, will be its impact on Europe. If there is a Brexit, which opinion polls aren't pointing to, but if there is, then it could create a widening of the cracks within the cohesion of the wider EU nations.
So, Jane, are you saying that this is just a nationalist or an isolationist culture, a streak in the Brits? Or is it that merging into the common market has not been to Britain's economic advantage?
I think they're woven into one thing, and certainly in the minds of many voters. I think if we consider the European economy broadly, particularly since the crisis, when we see now years of pretty slow wage growth, we see in some of the European countries and in some pockets of the communities, perhaps young people, we see some level of depossession. We see asset price inflation leaving some people feeling depossessed, income inequality of course widening as well. So there are certain economic factors which are making many voters feel disgruntled. Now this perhaps is one reason why there is this blame perhaps posted on the EU. This is one reason perhaps why there's nationalistic tendencies in Europe too, and even in the US, of course, we see voters now more polarised and away from the centre. So again, a lot of disgruntled voters. That is perhaps one reason. And now, of course, in Europe we have an immigration crisis, and I think you could argue that immigrants are again perhaps a scapegoat, and another reason why some people feel that they would be better off perhaps outside the EU.
Jan, what's your sense about why are the Brits asking to leave now? Why are there fresh doubts about whether the union is worth staying in or not?
Well, I think part of the backdrop is that there has been quite a lot of noise coming out of Europe over the last few years to do with the European debt crisis and so on. But I'm afraid that the main driver for the whole motivation for this referendum has actually very little to do with the rest of Europe. It has a lot to do with domestic politics in the UK. The Conservative Party is deeply divided over the question of Europe, and by offering a referendum in the second term, David Cameron was essentially able to neutralise the Europe issue for his entire first term in office. And that was instrumental to him in obtaining a second term in office. But as soon as that second term was then achieved, the referendum issue then had to be delivered on. And now we see, of course, these deep divisions resurfacing within the Conservative Party. So in effect, this referendum and the associated risks to the US economy have everything to do with domestic party politics within the Conservative Party. It's a big price for the UK economy to pay for peace within the ruling party.
Okay. Would you concur, Jeff, that this is largely domestic politics? Britain doesn't feel that the immigrant problem is too serious, or that it's paying too much and getting too less? There is no economic motivation to this vote?
Yeah, I mean, I partly agree with that. I think some of it's to do with domestic politics, as mentioned. I think there's also a fact that since 1973, a lot has changed. One of the things that's changed clearly is that the European Economic Community, the sort of miracle of Europe, hasn't really been a miracle. And I think a lot of UK investors, UK politicians have become a bit disenchanted with Europe. And then also you've had the whole Middle Eastern crisis and the tragedy of the refugees pouring into Europe, which has really accentuated the immigration issue. So I think there's been a sort of a number of factors, but domestic UK politics is certainly one of those factors.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, let's do one thing. Let's take a break. We'll come back, but the more important problem for us far away in India is what does this mean to financial markets if indeed there is an exit or there is a leave vote on June 23rd. We are back in a minute.